I was sitting in the doctor's waiting room when my phone rang and my only daughter, Angela, spoke with a coldness I had never heard before. "Mom, we're going to Europe tomorrow. I already sold your beach house and your car. We needed the money. Bye." Then she hung up just like that. 45 years of raising her, protecting her, sacrificing for her, and she discarded me as if I were nothing. But instead of breaking down, I took a slow breath and smiled, because my daughter didn't know everything about me. My name is Antonia Brooks, I'm 71 years old, and until that very moment I thought I knew my child. I became a widow just 6 months earlier when my husband, Robert, suffered a heart attack during breakfast, after serving me coffee with cream, toast, and kissing my forehead as he did every morning for 45 years. Angela had seemed supportive after his death, visiting often, helping with arrangements, taking me to the grocery store, even insisting I get a checkup. "Now that you're alone." A smile on her face that I once mistook for love but now recognized as convenience. The beach house she sold had been our sanctuary, the place Robert and I bought when Angela was 15 through years of sacrifice, where we spent every summer, celebrated holidays, and created a lifetime of memories while I cooked, cleaned, and cared for everyone, including Angela, her boyfriends, and later her husband, Edward. And the old Ford pickup she sold so casually had been Robert's pride, the truck we drove when times were simple and love was enough. Now I finally understood. To Angela, these weren't memories. Robert treated that old pickup like it was part of the family, washing it every Sunday, changing the oil himself, always parking it under the same tree. And Angela knew exactly what it meant to me, how his scent still lingered in the seats, how it was the last physical piece of him I still had. When she hung up the phone, I sat alone on that hard green plastic chair in the doctor's waiting room, surrounded by coughing strangers, and for the first time since Robert died, I didn't cry. Instead, I felt a strange calm settle over me as I suddenly remembered something I had completely forgotten. 3 days before he passed, Robert had given me a manila envelope and told me gently, "Antonia, put this in your dresser. If something happens to me, open it only when you feel ready." In the chaos of grief and funeral arrangements, I had tucked it away and never opened it. Even as the doctor told me I was healthy for my age and just needed more rest, my mind was miles away, thinking of that envelope, of Angela's cold voice, and of how her husband Edward, who had always seen me as a burden, had surely pushed her into this betrayal. When I walked out and waited for the bus, since apparently I no longer had a car, I actually smiled at the poetry of it all. My daughter believed she had stripped me of everything, but my Robert had always planned ahead. On the bus ride home, watching the city pass, people hurrying, each with their own tragedies and secrets, I felt a quiet strength rising inside me. When I finally reached my house, I went straight to my bedroom, opened the dresser drawer, and there it was. The manila envelope, exactly where he told me to keep it, waiting for me to finally be ready. My hands shook a little as I lifted the envelope, feeling the weight of several documents inside, and seeing my name written on the front in Robert's careful handwriting made my chest tighten. I sat on the bed we had shared for decades, took a slow breath, and let the quiet evening shadows settle around me like old friends instead of things to fear. I opened the envelope gently, almost like I was unwrapping a birthday gift, and what I found inside changed everything. There were deeds, financial papers, investment certificates, and a handwritten letter from Robert that made my eyes fill the moment I saw his familiar script. He wrote that if I was reading his words, he was already gone, and he apologized for keeping certain things from me, explaining that he only wanted to spare me stress. He revealed that over many years he had quietly invested our savings into properties and small businesses, and that the beach house was only a tiny part of what we owned. There were 6 more properties, including the apartment building where Angela and Edward lived, along with shares in 3 companies worth far more than I could have imagined. According to Robert, I wasn't just comfortable, I was a wealthy woman, and now it was finally clear on paper. As I went through the documents with trembling hands, I saw deeds for homes in different neighborhoods, a downtown condo, a small coastal motel, and the paperwork showing he had secretly owned the 20-story building my daughter lived in through a company I had never even heard of, one where I was listed as the sole heir. There were bank statements, too, from accounts he'd opened quietly over the years, each with numbers that didn't seem real, coming from the humble bus driver I had loved for 45 years. 40 years Robert worked as a bus driver, yet somehow he had also become a quiet financial genius, turning every bit of our savings and every sacrifice into something far bigger without ever telling me. In his letter, he explained that he kept it all hidden because he never wanted me stressed about money, and he especially didn't want Angela to know the truth. He feared that if she realized how much we really had, her behavior toward us would change. The sad part was how right he had been. She had walked out on me believing I had nothing, when in reality we had built a whole life of security together. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I wandered through the house, running my fingers across old furniture Angela used to dismiss as outdated and staring at family photos, especially the one where she was just 5 years old, laughing in Robert's arms. I kept wondering when that loving little girl had disappeared and how she had grown into someone so distant. Early the next morning the phone rang again. Angela's voice sounded softer, but I already knew those shifts only came when she wanted something. She said she and Edward had already taken care of the sale of the beach house and the truck, and that they had generously deposited my portion into my account. Then she proudly said they kept 70% and left me with 30% so I would have a little something until I found a smaller place to live, explaining they needed the money for Edward's supposed business opportunity in Europe. 30% of what was entirely mine, offered back to me as if it were a favor. Yet I kept my voice steady, letting her finish while I quietly realized just how far she had drifted from the daughter I was. Generous? I see, I told her softly, trying to keep my voice steady. And when are you leaving? She sounded almost excited as she replied, this afternoon. Our bags are already packed. We'll be gone for at least 6 months. Maybe longer if everything works out. But don't worry, Mom. When we come back we'll help you find a small place. Something that suits your needs. My needs. As if she had the slightest idea what those were. Still, I simply said, all right, Angela. Have a safe trip. She sighed with relief and said, I knew you'd understand. You're always so kind. We love you, and then hung up. I stood there holding the phone, and for the first time since Robert passed I actually laughed. A deep, unexpected laugh I didn't know was still inside me. The entire situation was so unbelievable it felt almost humorous. My daughter had taken my home, sold my belongings, spoken to me with a tone that made my skin crawl, and all to chase some risky plan overseas. Yet what hurt wasn't the money. It was how effortlessly she had pushed me aside. After 45 years of raising her, supporting her, and loving her without limits, she dismissed me with a phone call that lasted barely 2 minutes. When I checked my bank account, there it was, the so-called fair share she mentioned. To her it might have looked generous, but to me it was an insult. They had sold the beach house far below its value just to get quick cash, and the simplicity with which they handled it all showed exactly how little they truly cared. Robert's truck had also been sold for almost nothing, and that afternoon from my window, I watched Angela and Edward load their suitcases into a cab. He with 2 oversized bags, she with an expensive carry-on, laughing, kissing, and planning their grand adventure without once looking toward my house or bothering to say goodbye. When the cab pulled away, I sat in the kitchen with tea and Robert's documents spread out before me, knowing I had decisions to make. I could hire a lawyer, reclaim every property, and undo what they had taken, but something inside me whispered that there was a better, more instructive way. I called Mr. Peterson, the lawyer who had handled Robert's affairs, and he agreed to see me the next morning. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time since Robert passed, and even dreamed of him sitting in his favorite chair, smiling as he told me, "It's about time you stood up for yourself." And when I woke, it wasn't happiness or sorrow I felt, it was determination. The next morning, I dressed in the wine-colored dress Robert always loved, fixed my hair, added a touch of makeup, and saw a strong woman staring back at me in the mirror. At Mr. Peterson's downtown office, surrounded by marble floors and tall windows, he greeted me kindly, but the moment he saw the documents, his whole expression shifted, stunned by the extent of what Robert had left me. "Mrs. Brooks," he said slowly, "this is far more than I expected. Robert was a very wise man." I nodded and told him I already understood what I owned. What I needed now was to know my legal options. Mr. Peterson confirmed that everything was in order. The documents were legitimate and I was indeed the rightful owner of all the properties. And he also verified what I had already suspected. The sale of the beach house was illegal because Angela had no authority to sell it. "We can recover the house immediately, Mrs. Brooks, and we can file a fraud case against your daughter," he said, but I shook my head. I didn't want legal revenge, I wanted a quieter, more strategic path, and asked him to keep everything secret for now while discreetly undoing the fraudulent sale and helping me take full control of all my properties, especially the building where Angela lived. He agreed, explaining it would take a few weeks, and when I left his office, I felt as though I had awakened from a long, heavy dream. Life outside continued normally. People rushing down the sidewalks, cars honking, shops opening, but I walked through the city with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. Over the next few weeks, the strangeness of my double life settled in. Publicly, I was the poor widow abandoned by her ungrateful daughter, but privately, I was a wealthy woman quietly reclaiming everything that belonged to her. Mr. Peterson called me regularly with updates and I remained in my home, despite what Angela imagined, awakening each morning to breakfast at the same table where Robert and I once talked about our future, before taking calm walks through the neighborhood, greeted by neighbors with that mix of pity and curiosity reserved for people whose misfortune is a people in the neighborhood treated me the way they always treat someone who has recently lost their spouse, gentle voices, sad smiles, and a mix of sympathy and quiet curiosity. One afternoon, my longtime neighbor Aurora approached me while I was watering the plants and asked if it was true that Angela had gone off to Europe and left me alone. I simply told her yes, that Angela and Edward had business overseas, and she immediately worried about how I would manage, knowing everyone assumed Robert hadn't left much behind. I reassured her that I was doing just fine, even when she kindly offered food and help with groceries. The same kind of conversations repeated with the butcher, the baker, and the woman at the corner store. Always the same soft tone people reserve for someone they believe is struggling. I smiled and thanked them, even though a small part of me found it strangely satisfying to keep up this quiet act while knowing what was really happening behind the scenes. Then one Wednesday morning, Mr. Peterson called with real progress. He had successfully reversed the sale of the beach house, and the buyers had been refunded since they weren't aware of the issue. The property was officially mine again. As for the building where Angela lived, he explained it would take about 2 more weeks to shift full control back into my hands, even though I was technically already the owner. After the call, I sat with my coffee and thought about my daughter. 3 weeks in Europe and not a single message. Once she had gotten what she wanted, it was as if I no longer existed, but I knew the situation would look very different to her soon. Feeling ready, I decided it was time to go see the beach house again and remind myself of what was truly mine. I took the bus to the coast, following the same route Robert and I had traveled countless times, and when I reached the beach house, it looked almost unchanged, still small, cream-colored and peaceful with its porch facing the ocean. The only difference was a few new plants placed on the steps. I sat across the street for nearly an hour just looking at it and letting old memories return. Little Angela running barefoot in the sand, summers filled with picnics, Robert cooking on the grill while I prepared food inside, and later Angela arriving with friends, then partners, and eventually with Edward. All those warm memories had meant so much to us, yet she had treated the house like it was nothing more than a way to get quick money. After a while, an older man stepped out of the house and noticed me. He approached gently, asking if I was all right, and I told him I was simply remembering the people who once lived there. He explained that they had been told the previous owner, me, was seriously ill and had to sell the house quickly, and he added that they never met the family directly because everything was handled through middlemen. Hearing that lie repeated by a stranger stung more than I expected. He mentioned they were sad to leave because they truly liked the place but were relieved they at least got their money back. I walked away feeling heavier than when I arrived. It wasn't just the loss or the trouble Angela caused, it was the fact that she had used a false story about my health to justify everything, treating me as if I were nothing more than a detail she could twist whenever it suited her. Angela had treated me not as a person with feelings but as an obstacle to be pushed aside, and that night I called Mr. Peterson again to tell him I wanted Robert's truck back as well. He explained it would be harder because although the truck was in my name, Angela had used a power of attorney, one I had unknowingly signed during my grief after Robert's death, to sell it. I remembered her handing me papers back then, saying they were for funeral matters, and I had trusted her blindly, not realizing she had been setting her plans in motion. Still, I told Mr. Peterson to proceed, and in the weeks that followed, my days took on a strange duality. In the mornings I played the role of the helpless widow neighbors pitied, but in the afternoons I became a strategist, studying Robert's documents, learning about finances and working closely with Mr. Peterson. I discovered how wise Robert had been with his investments, how valuable the building Angela lived in had become, and how deeply Edward was drowning in debt. Debt secured with an apartment he didn't legally own. Finally, one Friday Mr. Peterson called with the news I had been waiting for. All the paperwork was complete, every property was securely under my control again, and even Robert's truck had been recovered thanks to a cooperative buyer. I thanked him, feeling a quiet but powerful satisfaction, and then told him there was one final task. I needed him to I decided to turn the tables and have Mr. Peterson prepare an eviction notice for Angela, and after a brief pause on the line, he asked if I was certain. Completely certain, I replied. She had decided I was unimportant in her life. Now she would learn how important I truly was. I instructed him not to send it to Europe, but to wait until she returned, and I had a feeling it would be very soon. That same afternoon, Aurora came rushing over with neighborhood news. Edward was in trouble with the bank for loans he had taken using the apartment as collateral, an apartment he didn't legally own, and Angela had no idea. It seemed she would have to return from Europe to sort out the mess, discovering not only Edward's deception but also that she had sacrificed her relationship with me for him. Perfect, I thought, as everything was unfolding exactly as I had anticipated. That night, I sat on the porch with a cup of tea, gazing at the stars, and remembered Robert's words that the stars were souls watching over their families. If that was true, he was up there orchestrating this plan even after his death. "Thank you, my love," I whispered to the sky. The next morning, Mr. Peterson called with news. Angela had just arrived in the country alone. Edward stayed in Europe after a rumored big fight, and the eviction notice would reach her the following day. I stood in the kitchen, a mixture of nervousness and satisfaction coursing through me, knowing the moment of reckoning was finally at hand. Anticipation coursed through me as the weeks of silent planning culminated in the moment for my first real move. Angela was about to discover that her mother was far from the defenseless victim she believed. Aurora brought the news the next day. Angela had returned to her apartment Tuesday night, looking pale and exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, carrying only one suitcase and completely alone. Strangely, she didn't have her keys and had to ask the superintendent for the emergency copy. Edward had apparently stayed behind, or perhaps Angela had finally realized the truth about him. That same afternoon, Mr. Peterson called to confirm that the eviction letter had been delivered and received in person. 30 days to vacate, he reminded me, and hesitated. "Are you sure you want to do this? She is your daughter after all." I replied firmly, "Mr. Peterson, my daughter kicked me out of my own house with a 2-minute phone call. She sold my things without asking, treated me like garbage. Now she will learn that actions have consequences." That night, sleep eluded me as I imagined Angela reading the letter. The initial confusion, the disbelief, the mounting panic, and the moment she realized that it wasn't a mistake, that every word and action was intentional and final. The next morning at 8 o'clock the phone rang. It was Angela, her voice trembling with desperation. "Mom, I need to talk to you urgently," she said. I replied calmly, "Good morning, honey. How was Europe?" But she cut me off, panic in her tone. "Mom, I don't have time for that. I received a very strange letter yesterday. It says I have to vacate my apartment in 30 days. It must be a mistake, right? Do you know anything about this?" I feigned ignorance. "An eviction notice?" I asked. "From a company I've never heard of?" "Robert Investments Incorporated," she said. I smiled inwardly at the irony. It was the company Robert had secretly set up, and now the poetic justice was hers to face. "No, honey, I've never heard that name," I said, keeping my voice calm. She continued, her panic mounting. "Mom, I need your help. Edward left me in Europe, ran off with another woman, and now I come back to this. I don't understand what's happening." The irony was exquisite. She had abandoned her mother for a worthless man, and now she remembered she had one. "Of course, honey. Come over whenever you want." "I'm on my way," I said, hanging up. I stood before the mirror, adjusting my conservative gray dress, tying my hair in a simple bun, and practicing the expression of a worried yet resigned mother. When Angela arrived, she would find that the helpless woman she thought I was had long since disappeared, replaced by someone who had regained control of everything, and now, finally, had the upper hand. I made sure Angela saw exactly what she expected: a poor, vulnerable widow abandoned by her own daughter. When she arrived an hour later, I was struck by how terrible she looked. Weight loss, deep dark circles under her eyes, wrinkled expensive clothes, and red eyes from crying. "Mom," she said, pausing as if she had forgotten how our relationship had ended. "Come in, honey. Do you want some coffee?" I asked. "Yes, please." We sat at the kitchen table where I had gone through Robert's documents weeks ago. Angela looked small and lost, like the child who once came to me with school problems. Mom, I'm so sorry for how I left. I know I didn't treat you well. It's in the past, honey, I said, but she shook her head. No, it's not. I said horrible things and now I have no one. She went on, recounting Edward's betrayal. He had left for Paris with a 25-year-old hotel waitress, fabricating a European business to fund his escape and leaving her with mountains of debt, using the apartment we had lived in as collateral. How is that possible? She asked, panic rising. I feigned helplessness. Property matters are complicated, honey. The banks are coming after me for his debts and there's this eviction notice. I don't know what to do. I have no money, no job, no place to live. Tears streamed down her face. Real, raw desperation. My heart softened for a fleeting moment, tempted to console her, but then I remembered the coldness in her voice, the way she had discarded me, and I remained silent, letting the weight of her choices sink in. I remembered the cold tone she had used the day she called me from the doctor's office, the ease with which she dismissed me, the way she spoke as if I were nothing but a burden, and now she sat across from me, helpless. When I asked if she had spoken to a lawyer about the eviction notice, she shook her head. I don't have money for a lawyer, Mom. We spent everything in Europe, and Edward took what little was left when he disappeared with that woman. I asked what she planned to do, and with trembling lips she finally said the words I had been expecting. I thought, maybe I could stay with you for a while, just until I get a job. The irony wasn't lost on me. After throwing me out of my own home, after selling my belongings, after treating me with contempt, she now wanted the mother she had discarded to save her. Of course, honey, I said gently, this will always be your home. She looked genuinely stunned. Really, Mom? After everything? You're my daughter, Angela. That will never change. She stood and hugged me then, not with love but with desperation, clinging to me like someone drowning. I returned her embrace, but this time it wasn't pure affection. There was planning in my arms, intention in my calm. Thank you, Mom, she whispered. I promise I'll find a job soon. I won't be a burden. Don't think about that now, I told her. Rest first. We'll figure things out. Inside the envelope was a short letter and a small key. The letter read, Antonia, if you are reading this after having received the main envelope, it means our daughter is going through a difficult time. This key opens a safety deposit box at the Central Bank downtown branch. The number is 247. There is something there that can help you help her, but use it wisely. With eternal love, Robert. Angela read over my shoulder, wide-eyed. A safety deposit box? Dad had a safety deposit box. I had no idea. Neither did I lied. Your father never told me about this. Do you think we should see what's inside? She asked, desperation lacing her voice. I hesitated, letting her anxiety simmer a little longer, and then said, maybe tomorrow. That night we shared dinner for the first time in months. She had cooked, trying to be useful, but every bite tasted of guilt and desperation. Between mouthfuls she recounted the European disaster. Edward had lied about everything, not just the business but the debts too, over $100,000, some in her name through forged documents. I never thought he'd use the documents I gave him to handle banking for this, she said, distraught. And now the banks say I'm responsible. The divorce. I don't even know where he is. His phone is disconnected, no emails, nothing. I listened, calm. Perfect. Edward had vanished like the rat he was, leaving Angela to face the consequences alone. In a way, he had done me a favor, and the game I had begun weeks ago was now poised to reach its next stage. Now my daughter was feeling exactly what I had when Edward abandoned me, betrayal by someone she had trusted completely. I didn't know things were so bad, Mom, she said. I thought Edward loved me, that we were going to build something together, but it turns out I was just an easy way for him to get money and documents. Tears streamed down her face. How could I have been so stupid? How did I not see who he really was? I kept my composure, letting her speak. Love can be blinding sometimes, honey. Don't blame yourself. But Mom, I didn't just ruin my life. I ruined yours too. I took your house, your truck, your things, all for a man who abandoned me at the first opportunity. Now we're two poor women trying to survive because of me. It's in the past, Angela. We'll be okay. No, it's not. We're both in trouble because of my mistakes. You lost everything Dad left you, and I lost my marriage and my future. If only she knew, I thought, that at this very moment I had more money than she could imagine, that I owned the building where she lived, that a single call could solve all her problems, but it wasn't time yet. The next day we went to the bank. Angela was nervous, hopeful, and I maintained my act as a confused widow. The bank employee led us to box 247, verified my ID and opened it. Inside were jewels, rings, necklaces, bracelets, earrings. Some heirlooms from Robert's family, others new, along with a letter explaining their origin and value. Angela gasped. "Mom, this must be worth a fortune." "You think so?" I said calmly, pointing to an emerald set in pearls. "Dad saved a treasure here." According to Robert's letter, the jewels were worth around $200,000. A fortune, yes, but only a piece of the larger plan I was orchestrating. Nothing compared to the rest of my assets. The jewels felt like finding a few coins under the sofa when you have $1 million in the bank. "What do we do with this, Mom?" Angela asked. "I don't know, honey. They're family memories. But Mom, we could sell some of the pieces. With this money, you could get your beach house back and I could pay off some of Edward's debts." There it was again. Angela's first instinct was to solve Edward's problems rather than think beyond them. "Are you sure you want to use your father's inheritance for that?" I asked. "What other option do I have, Mom? If I don't pay soon, the banks will foreclose on everything. Technically, I don't own anything. It's all in Edward's name." I watched her, heart aching, as she spread the jewels across the kitchen table, reducing decades of family history to numbers on a spreadsheet. "Mom, I think I can get $180,000 for the jewels," she said one afternoon, counting bills. "It's less than I expected, but it's enough to pay the urgent debts." "Are you sure you want to do this?" I asked again. "I have no choice. If I don't pay, they'll seize everything, maybe even this house if they find legal grounds." And just like that, she had no idea that the mother she thought was powerless had the power to control every move in this game. but never fully understood. Once knew. They were money.